Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. For the first time since this war began between Russia and Ukraine, a NATO member has been hit. A Russia-made missile strayed into Polish territory. It killed 2 Polish citizens. What was initially feared was this was a deliberate hit by Russia, came to be discounted in the last few hours. Both US as well as Polish officials have said that this was likely a Ukrainian missile that was fired in self-defense by one of its air defense systems. Now, in either case, it does show what a dangerous precipice, what a razor's edge this war stands on. The question is, yes, this time it's been by accident. This time it did not originate from Russia, but what's to guarantee the next time might be different? How real is the threat of escalation in this 9-month-long war between Russia and Ukraine, particularly so after today's events?
It's the first confirmed case of the war in Ukraine having caused casualties in another country. This one was not on Ukraine territory, where there's been a spurt in Russian missile strikes over the last 24 hours. Media reports said 2 Polish citizens were killed as a missile landed in a village in eastern Poland, 4 miles from the country's border with Ukraine. The Polish president came out to say that there's no sign yet that the hit was an intentional attack. Investigations continue. Not just another missile strike, because this one was in NATO territory. And the hit holds massive consequences arising out of what is potentially a vicious escalation of the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
An attack on all allies in that principle of collective defense. But there are indications emerging now that the US may be stepping back and taking NATO back from potentially a devastating confrontation directly on the ground with Russian forces.
As alarm buttons were pushed in Warsaw, tremors were felt at the G20 summit in Indonesia. G7 and NATO leaders got into a huddle as US President Joe Biden called an emergency meeting. Biden underscored support for Ukraine, even as he expressed strong doubts on the missile in Poland coming from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
The Polish Foreign Ministry identified the missile as being made in Russia, but the Polish president was more cautious about its origin, saying that officials did not know for sure who fired it or when it was made. Russia rejects any hand in firing a missile into Poland. The Ukraine sees reason to claim Russia's deliberate bid to escalate the conflict.
Hitting missiles on NATO territory. This is Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a very significant escalation. We must act, and I want to say now to all our Polish brothers and sisters, Ukraine will support you. Terror will not break free people. Victory is possible when there is no fear. You and I don't have it.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called an emergency meeting of the alliance's envoys to discuss the events close to the Ukrainian border in Ukraine.
We have no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. And we have no indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO.
It boils down to one factor. Where did the missile that hit Zewodo village in NATO member Poland come from? Theories raised range from it being a Russia missile fired into Ukraine, crossing over into Poland, or even that it was a Ukrainian warhead to counter Russia. All eyes on a definitive statement as mind-boggling fallouts are calculated.
All right, joining us on the talking point this evening, Achal Malhotra is a former diplomat, foreign policy expert. Dr. Tara Karta is former director with the National Security Council Secretariat. Ksenia Kondratieva is a senior Russian journalist from Moscow. Patrick Kugel is a senior analyst from Warsaw. And Bohdan Naalyo is the chief editor of the Kiev Post, who's joining us. Bohdan Naalyo, in the immediate aftermath of this attack on Poland, you had the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky go on television and claim directly that this was an attack by Russia. Now it appears, both from American officials as well as we heard from the Polish president a few hours ago, this was likely a missile that originated from Ukraine. Did Zelensky jump the gun?
No, he didn't jump the gun. This is what we could assume at that moment. I think the most important message is that Russia is responsible. Russia is firing rockets almost up to the border of Poland. Imagine, Lviv and beyond. So they're very lucky that no rocket has actually struck Poland. Whether or not this was an anti-missile rocket from the Ukrainian side remains to be seen. Possibly it was. But as Chancellor Scholz said today, at the bottom line is that Russia is responsible. It has launched this war, it is attacking Ukraine, and it is firing missiles right up to the border of a NATO country. So that is the message, not whose missile actually landed a few kilometers beyond the border. It is Russia that is responsible.
Isn't it important to know where this missile originated from and whether this strayed into Polish territory, killing 2 Polish citizens by accident or whether by design or intention? Because now the impression that we're given, both from American officials and Polish officialdom, is that this was likely a missile that was fired by Ukrainian self-defense. Does that change the nature of how Poland and maybe the rest of NATO responds to this attack? Patrick Ugiel. Patrick, can you hear me?
I guess that was a question probably to me in Warsaw.
Yes, correct.
So I think it is absolutely very crucial, and this is very encouraging information that it was not a deliberate attack from Russia, by Russia, but it was rather unfortunate accident. It changed a lot the dynamic of relations between the NATO countries and Russia. It means that we avoided the worst scenario in which the war escalates further. Nevertheless, this situation, this incident shows how dangerous the war in Ukraine has become and how easily it can spill over to neighboring countries and escalate into an open conflict between the NATO alliance and Russian Federation. And I agree, the whole responsibility of this situation is on the side of Russian Federation, which is waging its war in Ukraine. And we must remember that yesterday it was a massive shelling of Ukrainian critical infrastructure across the country. There was almost 100 missile strikes fired on the territory of Ukraine. Most of the strikes of the missiles were brought down by Ukrainian forces, but nevertheless, it resulted in this accident that most likely one of the Ukrainian rockets landed on the Polish territory, killing two people.
Okay, let me ask Ksenia Kondratьeva, senior Russian journalist, as to, both what Patrick said and what Mr. Naalyo said, that the ultimate responsibility for this has to lie on Russia. Even the most proximate reason, which was Russia launching a series of missile strikes, the Ukrainians claim up to 100 missiles hit Ukrainian targets over the last 24 hours or so. That's why the Ukrainians had to fire in self-defense. Their air defense systems kicked in. That's why accidentally one of these missiles strayed into Polish territory. So ultimately, the buck stops with Russia. It's because Russia was doing these airstrikes that Ukraine had to retaliate.
I agree that Russia is the aggressor. It has launched a war, whatever it calls it, a special operation. That doesn't really matter right now. But we have to understand what kind of discussions are we having. We can continue the war for next 10 years, keep blaming Russia and putting it under sanctions, saying that, okay, it's aggressor, all blame on it. And the war will just continue. Is that one way we want this discussion to go forward? or there is any other way. I think this crisis, this incident, whatever it was deliberate or not, is shows us how the war can be dragged on, and how the escalation, how some parties to this conflict are trying to escalate it. This is very dangerous. This is what is important. I'm sure it was not something surprising for Poland that one day such thing can happen, because it is a real war. It's not just a picture on the TV. People die every day.
But Ksenia Kondratьeva, this war can end tomorrow if Vladimir Putin says, all right, we're pulling back our troops. It's as simple as that.
So I don't think it works like this in geopolitics. And you know it for yourself. It's not that simple. Mm-hmm. If it was that simple, the war wouldn't start.
So what? Okay, you tell me now. It's going to be 9 months. It's going to be 9 months next week since this war began.
Exactly.
What would it take for Vladimir Putin to end this war? What does he want?
Is it a question addressed to me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Mr.
Yes.
Putin?
What would it take to put an end to this war?
I think you should ask Mr. Putin. I think you should listen to what he's saying in all his speeches, and not just you. I mean, not you exactly. I mean, the world community, because that question has been there since February last year. What does Putin want?
No, because Ukraine is very clear what it will take to end this war. Zelensky has been saying that all that Russia needs to do is to leave all the territory that they've occupied since the 24th of February. I think they're very clear about what it will take to end this war. It's Russia that's not saying what it will take to end this war. Okay, let me ask that to Tarakarta, and then after that to Achal Malhotra. Tarakarta, I think what this incident does portend, and to that extent Ksenia Kondratьeva has a point, that look, this was literally on the razor's edge. For about the first 6 hours this morning, all of us were wondering whether we are on the precipice of World War III. If, God forbid, this missile actually originated from Russia, and whether or not by accident or by design strayed into Polish territory, today the nature of this conversation around the world would have been very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Zaka, what was interesting, one was that the hail of denials which came from everywhere. The NATO said, no, it was not meant to hit Poland. Somebody else said, no, probably it's not a Russian missile. There has been this statements from all around, including, I think, President Biden, who was trying to say, this is not a deliberate attack. Everybody is terrified of escalation. Number one. Number two is, Ukraine, has a whole phalanx of Soviet-era missiles. So it's entirely likely that it's Ukraine. Is it Russia's fault? I mean, who knows? The Russians are blasting the Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian centers, like they never did before, because I think one of the things is he's got this new general who's in charge of operations, who is giving everything he's got. He's going into it with hammer and tongs. And I just find it a little, maybe it's a coincidence that it happened just while the G20 was in session.
Yeah.
But in G20 again, you see that not everybody is ready to condemn Russia. It's a part of the lot who have said that, okay, Russia, we condemn this, blah, blah, all the rest of it. There's a separate NATO and G7 statement condemning Ukraine. So there's not a lot of unity in deciding. Everybody wants a war to end. I mean, just about everyone. Our Prime Minister said so. President Xi said so. Everyone wants a war to end. But like you said, nobody knows what the Russians want.
No, so Achal Malhotra, you look at the G20 communique, and Tarakarta is right. It even incorporates what Prime Minister Modi told President Putin a few months ago, that this is not the era of war. The point is, what will it take to end this war and make sure that this is not the era of war? Like I said, from the Ukrainian point of view, Russia is the aggressor. Russia is the one that's attacked their country, a sovereign country, and kept territory since the 24th of February. From the Ukrainian point of view, all that it will take to end this war is for Russia to leave that territory. Russia, though, is still not clear as to what its end objective for this special military operation is.
Well, Zaka, in a conflict like this, whenever they reach a situation when a ceasefire is declared and the parties come on the table of negotiation, there is always maximalist demands made from the parties to the conflict. In this case, obviously, Ukraine is likely to demand that Russia vacates all the territories, including even Crimea. Whereas Russia's objective, you said, from the beginning, there were at least two objectives. One was to prevent Ukraine becoming a part of the NATO, and to consolidate its positions in, those Donetsk, Luhansk, and in addition, now he had almost got control of, Zaporozhia and Kherson, but which Kherson he had to, withdraw, which everybody is saying is a tactical withdrawal. So, and in the meanwhile, Russia has also manipulated in such a manner that technically the people of those regions have gone for a referendum and asked for annexation to Russia, and technically they are a part of the Russian territory. So one has to then find out a meeting point.
Okay.
Either this war will end when one of the two parties is conclusively defeated, or when they come to some meeting point, somewhere there is a face saving.
Okay.
Or it is also possible that first a ceasefire is negotiated, then all the concerned parties are asked to come to a negotiating table with the mediation of 1, 2, 3, or 4 countries. Then this will become a frozen conflict and will go on for ages.
No.
There are examples, the Georgia conflict, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and number of other conflicts.
No, so the question then is, and I want to put this to Bohdan Nahalyo, I think it's very clear. If tomorrow Zelensky were to say that Russia can keep Luhansk and Donetsk, the two regions which supposedly Vladimir Putin launched this special military operation for, and say, okay, Crimea, anyway, since 2014, the Russians are controlling Crimea, that could be a way out. That could be a very serious way out of this 9-month-long war. Why is Zelensky now, as Ambassador Achal Malhotra said, taking this maximalist position where even Crimea is on the table?
I'm sorry, my dear Indian friends, this is not the narrative that we want to hear in Ukraine. Why don't we give away part of Ukrainian territory? Would you give away part of India to China or to Pakistan? No. Remember, it's not just Ukraine that is standing on these positions. Over 140 states in the United Nations recently supported Ukraine's position. So this is not just about, 2 or 3 countries or NATO countries. Let's be fair. And unfortunately, India keeps sitting on the fence. India, which calls itself the world's largest democracy, but even yesterday was sitting on the fence in G20. Yes, they don't want a nuclear war. We understand that. Nobody wants that. But you are buying arms and oil from Russia. You are passively supporting imperialism. You fought against British imperialism to become an independent nation, right? Why do you not support, as a democracy, Ukraine's right to be an independent member of the United Nations after it has been aggressed? Why should we give away Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea? Why? After naked aggression? Just because it suits you to have a quiet world and do your business? No. I'm afraid that either you face up to your responsibilities and you support the democratic world and in the independent world and not hide behind diplomacy. Russia.
But Mr. Nahalyo, the argument that was made by Russia. Give me a moment. Give me a moment, Mr. Nahalyo. The argument that was made by Russia when it started this war was there was unprecedented. Give me 10 seconds, because if we're going to be talking over each other, none of us will be able to understand what the other is saying. Give me 10 seconds to intervene, Mr. Bohdan Nahalyo.
Thank you.
When this war began, the justification by Vladimir Putin was there was this unprecedented expansion of NATO all the way to the Russian doorstep, something that he claimed was reneged upon by NATO when the USSR collapsed, that there will not be an eastward expansion. But over the last 30 years, the Russians claim that there has been unprecedented expansion of NATO to Russia's doorstep. That's why he launched this attack. And I'm not justifying it because it's not my place to justify it or not. But the Russian perspective is, and the Russian point of view is, that they need Luhansk and Donetsk as some kind of a buffer state against this eastward expansion of NATO.
We don't want to be part of Eurasia. We want to be part of NATO. We want to be part of the EU. That is our right. Respect us. Don't keep talking about Washington and NATO because it suits India's narrative. We respect us as a sovereign democratic country, the largest country in Europe. We want to be part of NATO. We want to be part of the EU. Please respect that. And don't think in terms of NATO expansion, which is the Russian narrative. Who gives Russia a right to control its so-called backyard? Does Britain have a right to control you because you were part of their empire and you speak English? Like the Russians say, these are Russian speakers. I mean, these are ridiculous arguments.
No,
Why do you
look,
buy
I'm
into
not here to justify the Russian argument or to diss the Ukrainian argument. My job is to ask questions. Your job is to give your point of view. All I put forth there was what the Russians were saying was the reason why they are giving to justify this aggression. I'm not saying that it is justified, but this is the reason that they are citing. But anyway, be that as it may, I want to go back. No, one second. I don't want you to hijack this debate. So let me go back to our guest from Warsaw, please. Let me go back to Patrick Ugiel. Patrick Ugiel, the ball now really is in the court of NATO. It's in the court of the European Union as to how to respond. And there seems to be this view that now with the oil price caps kicking in from December, Europe preparing for what is likely to be a harsh winter, that you're going to go into 3 months of this frozen conflict, and post the winter, only then will we have a decisive movement in this war one way or the other, or a decisive sort of conclusion to this war. Is Europe ready for that harsh winter?
I think Europe is ready, resolute, and very supportive of the Ukrainian case. I think Europe made necessary preparations for the winter. Luckily, happily so far, also the weather is very mild in Europe, so it's also supportive of our foreign policy goals. So Europe stands on the position that it is up to Ukraine to decide what the end of the conflict will be. As we have heard from the President Zelensky last week, he set out the long list of conditions under which Ukraine would be willing and open for the peace negotiations and for peaceful resolution.
But don't you see that as standing in the way, Patrick Ugiel, don't you see that as standing in the way of getting both sides to the negotiating table? It seems to me that Zelensky is the one who's laying out all the conditions.
Yes, because the situation in Ukraine is very clear. We have aggressor and we have a victim.
Of course.
And Europe is doing only this to support the country, independent sovereign country that was attacked by the external player.
Okay.
You remember what happened in Doklam in 2017?
Yes.
When China tried to build a road and some kind of infrastructure into the territory of Bhutan. Then India intervened, sent its troops to stop that kind of small intrusion into the territory of Bhutan. What is Europe doing now for Ukraine is something similar, but on the larger scale.
Okay.
So European Union and NATO will stand by the Ukraine as long as it is necessary. And I think no winter, no any other conditions will change that very resolute.
Senia Kondratiyeva, you heard from both the Ukrainian guest as well as from the Polish guest. As long as NATO continues this almost endless supply of weapons and money, this war is not going to end. This is not a war that Russia can win. Because you have, on the other side, you have an extremely motivated set of people for whom this is an existential crisis, and you have a tap of money and weapons that are seemingly never ending. It's loaded up against Russia. You're not going to win this war.
Well, I would say that Russia does have certain capacity. Of course, we don't know. We don't even know about the economic capacity for now, because the data on economy has been, not available for the past, since the beginning of the war, you can say. So we don't really have a clear picture. But as you said, if NATO continues supplying the weapons, if it continues pressing Russia on the sanctions, although despite the pressure is quite huge, we see that oil is traded, the natural resources are traded. So we cannot say that Russia is cut off completely from its earnings. So, I think
But what
we are
about
speaking of
pressure
a very
from within
long
Russia?
conflict. And
Ksenia Kondratiyeva, I believe that since the loss of Kherson in the last few days, there has been a lot of criticism, even in Russian, on television, on social media, criticizing the war strategy, criticizing the military strategy, even some criticism of Vladimir Putin.
of course, that would come, but you have to see the military strategy, you have to see the political implications of it. Most of criticism comes for the second part, for the political, because we are civilians, we are not fighting, we are not in the battlefield, so we can easily sit in our offices and criticize. That always happens. But what's important is, I would say, as a journalist who've been in Kherson and who've been to other Russia-controlled territories of Donbass, is that people are the ones who suffer the most when territories change hands, because that's really devastating for them.
Okay,
That's very important, and that's why most of criticism, that's where most of criticism came from.
Tarakarta, there is a view that all of this aggression that we're seeing, these 100 missiles over Kiev and other cities in Ukraine, is a response by the Russians to the fact that they are losing key territory. Kherson was lost a few days ago. It's the third biggest city in the country in Ukraine. And this was key to Vladimir Putin's plans to cut off the south or to get direct access to the Black Sea. Is Russia now seemingly sort of flaying its arms, if you will, at battlefield losses?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It is flaying a bit, but it's also getting ready. I think there's a sense that negotiations will begin soon. Like I said last time, each party is going to adopt the most maximalist position possible, maximum territory, maximum damage before they can even think of negotiations. But like I also said, there is a new general in charge of the war, one who has, well, not the best human rights credentials. So this is an all-out attack to sort of revive Russia, to get Russia going as this power which can get what it wants in Ukraine, which, like you and I said, nobody's very clear what exactly Putin wants. But I would like to tell the gentleman from Kyiv that, remind him that our prime minister is supposed to look after our interests, and that is what he's doing. And that while we sympathize hugely with the Ukrainian people, it's a terrible, terrible thing that is happening to them. But what we are saying is end the war. I don't see where is the problem with that? And that is what, if their president could bring himself to at least start talking about talks. You need to end this thing. It's done enough damage to the Ukrainians themselves.
Bohdan Nahayu, you want to respond to that, sir?
Yes, yeah. Look, the bottom line is we don't sit at a table with somebody who is occupying 20% of our country, destroying our towns, killing our civilians, deporting our population. Who are we supposed to talk to? Do you talk to killers in that way in India when somebody is raping your women or killing your people? No, you arrest them or you shoot them, you kill them, don't you? Well, we are acting in self-defense. Second point from the anchorman about weapons pouring in from NATO. I'm sorry, look at it the other way. Weapons are pouring in and missiles from Russia. Stop the weapons coming and the tanks and the missiles from Russia, and there's no need for Ukraine to ask its allies in the West to supply it with weapons to defend itself. Ukraine is not fighting on Russian territory. Russia is fighting on Ukrainian territory.
No, so the Russian argument to that is the missile strikes are a response to this endless flow of weapons from NATO. That is the Russian argument, sir. Sir, the Russian argument. Again, I hold no brief for the Russians. I have no dog in this fight. All I'm saying is the Russian argument is the missile strikes are a response to this endless supply of weapons from NATO to your country.
No, the weapons from NATO are a response to Russian aggression, occupation, killing of Ukrainians, right? So look, get Russia out of Ukraine, get reparations on the agenda, get war crimes and tribunals on the agenda, and then we can talk about.
But do you realistically believe, with the talk of reparations and war crimes on the anvil, that Russia would be inclined to withdraw from your country and to come to the negotiating table and to find a ceasefire? That doesn't seem like giving them a window to come to the negotiating table. That seems like pushing them away from the table.
Ukraine and the free world have to win. That's why Ukraine and the free world, the democratic world, regardless of India's position, unfortunately, have to win. I don't think it's in India's or China's position for Russia to win and destroy Ukraine.
Okay,
you are doing trade.
Achal Malhotra, I think you should take that question as to also the elbow room for countries like India, which have not taken a position on this war, which have sort of maintained equidistance between Ukraine and Russia. For our own national interests, I mean, you heard from Ambassador Tarakarta a moment ago. India believes that this is in its national interest. Anyway, I will let Achal Malhotra take that question. Is that elbow room closing? Today we were literally on the precipice, on war's edge. Had this rocket been fired from Russia with or without intent, we could have been having a different conversation altogether. Is that elbow room, is that window for countries like India to walk this balance sort of running thin?
Look, Zaka, this is true that what happened today had the potential of great escalation. And fortunately, the NATO has responded in a desirable manner. And I think that the Americans and NATO allies definitely not interested in taking entering into a situation where they have to fight a direct war with Russia.
All right.
And I also don't think Putin doesn't understand the implications of attacking NATO member state, because it's quite clear they are obliged under Article 4 and Article 5 to invoke this concept of collective security. Now,
all right, Ambassador Malhotra, Mr. Bodan, as well as Senia Kondratiyeva, thank you very much for joining us. Like I said, we were literally on the razor's edge. Had this missile been originated from Russia with or without intent, this would have been a different conversation altogether. But to try and make sense of not just this latest attack on Poland and what may be the consequences of it, but also, incidentally, today, Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, announced his intention to run for president again in 2024. How may that impact not just domestic politics in the United States, but also what kind of impact may that have on global politics, on the future course of this war in Ukraine? Joining me now is a foreign policy commentator and the host of Fareed Zakaria GPS on CNN. Fareed Zakaria, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
Pleasure, Jacob.
All right, let's start with what happened in Poland today, this missile attack. Now we have information from the Polish president. Also, American officials have been saying this over the last few hours, that it looks likely that this missile originated from Ukraine and not from Russia, and that it accidentally strayed onto Polish territory, killing 2 Polish citizens. Does this now sort of dampen down, scale down the possibility of any escalation in this war?
Oh, yes. I think it's highly unlikely that this event will produce any kind of upward spiral or escalatory spiral. Frankly, even if it had come out of Russian territory, I think it has been heartening to see the seriousness, the sobriety, and the caution with which mostly all the NATO members have been handling this. Recognizing that the important issue is not even was there something that came out of Russia, but was there an intention? Does it appear to have been a planned attack? I think people recognize that, look, war is a very messy business, and this is one of the many reasons why wars are terrible, and the sooner we can end this war, the better. There are going to be these kind of accidents, miscalculations, things like that. The important thing is to keep guardrails in place that do not produce unnecessary escalation, particularly escalation that comes out of an accident. So I think it's been heartening to see that there has been no irresponsible behavior on any side with regard to this. So I think that the chances of escalation are pretty low.
Had this been actually a missile that was fired from Russia with intent or accidentally and then hit Polish territory, do you think NATO would have been forced to respond because of Article 5, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all?
No, I think that, look, the Russians, if you remember, shot down a Malaysian airliner, and it didn't produce any kind of, any calls for an attack on Russia. Look, there is a very important difference between an intentional launch and an accidental, not even a launch, but the straying of a missile, which appears to be exactly what happened here. I think that Poland might have called a meeting to convey the importance and the seriousness of this, partly because obviously when you lose your own people, you have to show that you care about it and you want to do something. But I don't think we're not in a world in which that an accidental launch would result in NATO declaring war on Russia.
It's going to be 9 months since this war began next week. What is your assessment of where things stand as of right now? Two questions that people are asking. One, who's winning this war? And two, when is it going to end?
Russia is without any question losing the war, by which I mean, if you ask yourself, what were Russia's objectives? Russia's objectives were to take Kyiv, to topple the Ukrainian government, to instill fear in all those Ukrainians who have supported this Ukrainian democratic government. All those objectives have not been met, and in fact, the Russian army has moved out of about 50 to 60% of the territory that they gained since February 24th. In other words, they've been pushed back, not quite to their February 24th positions, but to very close to those positions. They've also lost, as far as one can tell, almost half of their advanced armored equipment, tanks, armored vehicles, missiles, things like that. And there seem to be casualties that are approaching about 100,000. Now, these are guesses, but that seems to be the extent of the Russian loss. So it's very difficult to see how this can be painted in any way as a Russian victory. Now, on the other hand, Ukraine is a much, much smaller country than Russia. The Russian defense budget is 10 times the size of Ukraine's. So this is a David and Goliath story in which David is doing astonishingly well. But unlike in the biblical tale, David is unlikely to be able to vanquish or completely defeat or destroy Goliath. So what is most likely is that David will cause a kind of stalemate. The Ukrainians will force the Russians to be stuck in their core territories in the Donbass, probably in Crimea. And at that point, when you have a real stalemate where the Russians are not advancing, but the Ukrainians are finding it very hard to advance, that's when negotiations will begin. I think the Ukrainian government has made it clear that they are open to negotiations. The Russian government has not. And I think that India can actually play a very important role here, because the key has to be to make Putin accept that he has not gotten what he wanted. The Ukrainians have been living with half a loaf since 2014. They have been living without Crimea, without the Donbass. That's about 20% of Ukraine's territory. Russia has to accept that it is not going to get what it wanted. And then there can be a negotiation about how you describe places like Crimea and the Donbass. My guess is we'll have them as kind of frozen conflicts, a little bit like what has happened in Kashmir, when neither side recognizes the other, but kind of life goes on. But in order to do that, there needs to be a concerted effort to get the Russians on board. India is perfectly positioned to do it, and I think it really should take this opportunity.
And now that India is going to be the next president of the G20, it's going to be hosting the G20 summit this coming year as well. But just to round off this conversation on the war, and then we'll come to Donald Trump in a moment. What's the future looking like for Vladimir Putin? Because clearly, as you said, he's not winning this war. Can a Putin who's been defeated on the battlefield, or someone who has to settle for something less than what he started off with, would he be able to survive?
It's anybody's guess. It's a very closed system. It's a very personalistic system, Jacob. If you think about it, this is the most personalistic dictatorship in the world, by which I mean even Xi Jinping. If Xi Jinping were to die tomorrow, you know what happens. The Central Committee of the Communist Party the Standing Committee of the Politburo would get together, they'd vote. One of the 7 members would become the next leader of China. If in a monarchy, if King Salman were to die, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia becomes king. In other words, there is institutions and rules of succession organizations. What happens if Putin dies? Nobody knows. It is literally a country with nuclear weapons, with a veto in the Security Council, spanning 9 time zones, run by one person. So we can't be sure. I think that my gut is that he will survive because he has created what he himself calls a vertical of power, which is so strong that it's very difficult to imagine even a military defeat dislodging him. Because who would replace him? Would it be a general? Would it be he's insulated himself from a lot of challenges. He's killed most of his political opponents, or jailed them, or exiled them. Mm-hmm. The military is, as far as we can tell, firmly under his control. He has a presidential guard, by the way, that is the only army that is allowed in Moscow. We're not sure how large it is, but it is probably over 100,000 soldiers that are under his personal control. It's a kind of like the Roman emperors had this Praetorian Guard. Putin has his own Praetorian Guard. It's a significant blow, but I myself think it would take more than that to dislodge this guy who's been in power 21 years now.
All right, let's now come to the other side of the Atlantic, to your part of the world. Incidentally, today, Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, announcing his bid to run again for office. First thing that comes to mind is, why now? The presidential election of 2024 is 2 years away. Why is he getting in so early? Is it to sort of blow out the rest of the Republican field? What's the intention? No one announces a presidential bid this early.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think it's a sign of weakness. I think it's exactly as you say, to try to scare a lot of people. It's also, in some ways, I think, an effort to scare prosecutors into thinking that he's going to be very powerful, and so they had better be careful. I don't think it's going to work. It's in some sense a sign of his weakness and a sign of his desperation. Look, he's a formidable political figure. He has a control over a part of the Republican Party that is really quite extraordinary. It is like a personality cult. But it is absolutely clear that a majority of Americans do not want him to be president or to be politically powerful. If you just think of it in simple terms, he lost the popular vote in 2016 by 3 million. He then lost the House of Representatives for the Republicans. He then lost his re-election bid, both losing the Electoral College and the popular vote by 7 million. He then helped the Republicans lose the Senate by losing the Georgia race, and he has now helped the Republicans lose the Senate again and do as badly as they did. The pollsters are now calculating that there was a 5% penalty, a 5-point penalty, that any candidate who had extreme association with Trump, an election denier, a strong MAGA supporter, that you suffered a 5% penalty for being associated with Donald Trump that closely. So it's pretty clear that he has a powerful, intense minority of America supporting him, but not a majority. And I think most importantly, Republicans are coming to realize this. So what you are seeing is elected Republicans, donors, all kinds of people coming out against him for the first time. Republicans have suddenly found their courage to come out against him. Sadly, it didn't It didn't happen when it was clear that he posed a threat to democracy after he essentially tried a coup d'état on January 6th. It happened when they realized that he was not a vote winner anymore. And this last election has shown very clearly that he's not much of a vote winner.
You say that there is now opposition within the mainstream Republican establishment to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is seen certainly by many establishment Republicans as a liability, not so much as an advantage. What shape or form may that take in a potential Republican field? Who are likely to be his biggest competitors in a Republican primary?
Oh, there'll be lots. DeSantis of Florida obviously is the leading one right now. But remember, Mike Pence, the former vice president, will run. Mike Pompeo, the former secretary of state, will run. Nikki Haley will run. My guess is you'll have a few others who will throw their hats in the ring. The key is going to be, will the party draw a line and come together around some alternative to Trump? Because otherwise, you could have a situation, which is, in some ways what happened in 2016, which is they all get 7, 8, 9%. He starts out with 20%, 25%. And then because of that first mover advantage, he is able to triumph. Look, the core proposition we're testing right now is going to be, is the Republican Party strong enough to act in some way as a gatekeeper, provide some guardrails, say, some things are not acceptable? Or has it been completely taken over by individuals and personalities? This story is not entirely unfamiliar to India. Political parties function best when they are grassroots organizations with strong local leadership, with strong institutions. When they become courts, run out of the central capital, run by a couple of people at the top, essentially all courtiers and no real deputies. That's what makes political parties very weak. It makes them prone to personality cults and to takeovers, and it's very bad for democracy. And that's true in the United States, and it's true in India.
Did you find it interesting, though, that when he made the announcement this morning here, India time, last night in the U.S., his daughter Ivanka Trump and son-in-law Jared Kushner were missing? In fact, Ivanka, I think, put out a statement saying, while she wishes her dad all the very best in his second political innings, as it were, she doesn't want to be part of it.
It's very telling. I think what it tells you is that some of his closest associates perhaps know that he is, somewhat more unhinged and erratic and temperamental, and that this is not likely to be a successful journey. I think that were he in a much more commanding position, imagine the circumstance, and again, to your point, Jacob, of why did he announce now? Imagine a circumstance where the Republicans and his candidates had done very well.
Yeah.
There would have been an immediate clamor, and people would have said, we need Trump to run. And Trump would then have said, no, I'm thinking. And then he would have allowed the wave to build. And after a while, almost seemingly to accede to this great demand of the people, he would reluctantly say, okay, yes, if you want me to, I will run again. Right? That would have been the scenario in which things went well. People thought he was doing well. People thought he was poised for another victory. In fact, it's exactly the opposite is happening. Everybody, everybody is fleeing the sinking ship. But it's not done yet. We do need to. I mean, the scenario I pointed out, which is that if the Republican Party does not come around and unify against Trump and make clear that there are certain guardrails, that somebody who is essentially tried to overturn an election is too extreme for the party, and that they will hold him accountable for that. He has a very strong base. He has a very strong base in the party, probably stronger than anybody else. And so the challenge is, can they get together and really unify against him, or around him at the very least?
I was just coming to that. I mean, is it possible to defeat Donald Trump in a Republican primary, given his hold on the base, as you said?
I think so, but there will have to be some. They'll have to present a united front. That's what I meant. Unite around him, meaning, isolate him, unite around some candidate who is plausible early on, and present the party with a vision. Say, look, do you want to go back to the past and all these, the drama, the fights, the legal issues, the hearings, or do you want to move forward? And I think that's the message that people like DeSantis will put forward. But look, as I say, this is a test of the Republican Party.
All right, and a final word. What may this mean for the other side? What does a Trump run mean for the Democrats? Does it mean that Joe Biden can then turn around and say that, look, I'm the only guy in the Democratic Party who can defeat Trump. I've done it once. I can do it again. Therefore, the justification for him running again.
Yeah, it's good for the Democrats. Nothing unifies the Democratic Party as much as Donald Trump. Nothing unifies, the disparate coalitions, and nothing brings out voters more than Donald Trump. But I suspect that doesn't completely address your question, because Biden is, look, if he were to run for a second term, his second term would be a term in which he would start at 82 and end at 86.
Yeah.
That's an advanced age for anyone. And I think that there's a real conversation to be had as to whether it would make more sense for Biden to step down and allow another generation of Democrats to move forward. I suspect that is a conversation that he will have, most importantly, with his wife and some key advisors. So I think that there will be a separate conversation about whether or not Biden is kind of just getting to the point where he should allow a new generation in. But I think Trump, for sure, helps him, but it helps every Democrat.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, Fareed Zakaria, thank you so much, as always, for your valuable insights, your time. Thank you for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so there you have it, Fareed Zakaria with his thoughts and opinions on not just what happened today in Poland, its potential for escalation, and he reckons even if it were originated from Russia, even if it were by design, he suspects the kind of maturity he's seen amongst NATO leaders today gives him hope that there isn't going to be a full-scale war. He also talked about Donald Trump, and he believes that the Republican Party this time around, its response to a Trump run will be different from 2016. He does think that the Republican Party will be able to unify against Trump and possibly even defeat him in a primary. All right, so that's a wrap. We'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time.